Do you think defending yourself is noble? That's exactly what makes you weak. Every time you rush to explain, you hand your throat over to the enemy. Machiavelli knew, whoever defends himself has already lost. Power isn't in proving innocence, it's in weaponizing silence. If this is already tearing you up inside, sign up now, because no one here will spare you the truth. What you will hear in this video is not advice, it is a sentence. You will understand why every time you open your mouth, you chain yourself, and how to reverse it instantly without moving a muscle. You don't realize it, but every time someone makes an accusation against you, there's an instant, a breath of a second, when your body decides before your mind. Your heart races, your breath shortens, and the urge to defend yourself takes over. It's in this reflex that your defeat lies. Machiavelli knew that the man who rushes to justify his honor has already lost it before he even opens it up in words. Because the moment you react, you declare to the world that the accusation carries enough weight to shake your foundation. This is the trap that corrodes leaders, destroys reputations, and turns giants into easy prey. Silence would have been fortitude, but defense exposes you like a wounded animal. You think you're appearing noble, reasonable, understandable. But no. You're only proving that you care more about other people's opinions than your own power. And when your peace depends on the other's acceptance, the other has already won. This is where the first blade cuts deep. Think about how many times you've fallen into this trap. At work, when someone insinuated your idea wasn't good, and you rushed to explain as if your life depended on that approval. In a relationship, when you heard, "You don't care about me anymore," and became desperate to prove otherwise, multiplying words that only reinforced the doubt. Each defense is like a stamp of weakness stamped on your own forehead. The accusation may even have been unfair, but your haste to counter it made it seem like you had something to hide. The world doesn't read intentions, it reads reactions. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. The accused who answers too quickly always seems guilty. Justice doesn't matter, truth doesn't matter. What matters is the smell of blood you release as you try to justify yourself. And in social theater, a drop of blood attracts the crowd like hungry sharks. It's hard to accept, but the game was never about justice. It's about perception. And on the board of perception, defense is always the weakest piece. Because every time you justify yourself, you're placing yourself beneath the other, acknowledging that they have the right to judge you. They launch the accusation, and you rush to obey the court of approval. This is where control slips through your fingers. Silence would have burned more, calm would have confused more, disdain would have commanded respect. But defense? It only proves you're vulnerable, and poorly managed vulnerability is living with defeat. Note, the men and women who most influenced you were never the ones who explained themselves. They were the ones who remained motionless in the face of noise. And that's why, when you fall into the trap of defense, you're already setting the stage for the next act, the invisible framing. When you defend yourself, you've already knelt. It doesn't matter if you're right. It doesn't matter if you're clean. The moment you rush to explain, you've handed the leash to the accuser. Machiavelli already knew, whoever controls the frame controls the game, and the frame is born in the silence you couldn't bear to maintain. The aggressor doesn't want the truth, he wants power, and you hand it over on a silver platter when you justify yourself. It's like a defendant who enters the courtroom and before the judge even speaks, shouts, "I'm innocent." The public doesn't see innocence, they see desperation, they see fear, they see weakness. And weakness, in the realm of power, is a scent of blood that attracts predators. There's no possible victory when you start by reacting, because the mere act of reacting is already defeat. Look around. In companies, on political stages, even in relationships. The weak one is always the one who is quick to say, "You misunderstood me." The weak one is the one who says, "I'm not like that." The weak one is the one who rushes to explain their intentions. And the more they explain, the more everyone feels they have something to hide. Have you ever seen that? The person who defends themselves too much doesn't convince anyone. They only reinforce doubt. The public is never judging facts. They're judging posture. The accuser seems in control, the accused seems cornered, and that's it. It's over. The truth doesn't matter. Logic doesn't matter. Defense only serves to validate the attack. Every word you utter in justification is a stone in your own grave. And this is where the cruelty reveals itself. It doesn't matter if you're right. If you accept the framing, you're already doomed. Machiavelli would smile from the height of his coldness at how many still fall for this childish trick, because power isn't gained by fighting accusations. Power is gained by ignoring them until they rot in the air. The man who doesn't defend himself is seen as enigmatic, dangerous, unreachable. The man who explains himself is seen as guilty, weak, and predictable. You decide which side you want to be on. But remember, whoever sets the framing dictates fate. And if you don't control it, you're just another symbolic corpse on the board. The next step is to understand how silence becomes a sword, and it's in this cut that the real blood begins to flow. The common man thinks he needs to speak to defend himself. The man who understands Machiavelli's power knows that silence is the most lethal weapon there is, because silence is not emptiness, it is not absence. Silence is a presence so dense it suffocates, an invisible blade that pierces the flesh unseen. When someone accuses you and you don't respond, you drop a bomb on the enemy's camp without moving your fingers. He expected noise, he expected resistance, he expected a predictable reaction. What he receives is nothingness. And this nothingness weighs more than 1,000 justifications. Silence forces you to look within, to fight your own ghosts. Every second you don't move is an eternity in the heart of those who wanted your reaction. It is in this interval that the enemy surrenders. He begins to sweat, to repeat words, to raise his voice, and the more he speaks, the more he betrays himself. Machiavelli knew silence is the sword that cuts without needing to shine. Look at the examples around you. When someone drops a hint in public, the room doesn't want to hear the accusation. It wants to see your response. Social theater always turns its eyes to the accused because the show is in your reaction. If you rush to justify yourself, you become the clown. But if you say nothing, allowing yourself only a slow smile, a steady gaze, a calculated stillness, the room changes direction. The accuser loses their shine, and you become the enigma. Everyone wonders, why didn't he react? Does he know something? Is he above this? The aura is born in this space, and aura is power. It doesn't need arguments. It doesn't need proof. It doesn't need noise. Aura is the mystery that paralyzes the entire room. Aura is the perception of absolute control. Aura is the invisible sword that cuts through the entire crowd with the same force it cuts through the enemy. And when you learn to sustain silence, you learn to sustain the aura. But don't mistake silence for weakness. Machiavellian silence is pure attack. It's psychological torture. It's letting your enemy hang himself by his own rope while you watch. He expected you to run to clear your image. You don't run. He expected you to deny the accusation. You don't deny it. He expected you to show emotion. You don't. What happens then? He begins to stumble over his words. The accusation that seemed so firm begins to sound repetitive, exaggerated, desperate. The audience no longer sees a strong accuser. They see a weak one begging for attention. And you remain immobile. You didn't just win. You turned the accusation into a reflection of his weakness. Silence made him destroy himself. This is the invisible blade that few know how to wield. But Machiavelli always knew, and that's why the next step goes beyond silence. It's not just silence, It's turning the blade. It's transforming the attack into proof of the enemy's insecurity. Here begins the true Machiavellian cruelty. Silence is not enough, it must be reversed. Silence is already a cutting blade, but the turning of the blade is the fatal blow. When someone accuses you of arrogance, manipulation, or coldness, the average person rushes to deny it. I'm not like that, you misunderstood me. And in that instant, they've already lost. The Machiavellian doesn't deny, doesn't defend themselves, doesn't plead. They take the accusation and return it to the accuser like a distorted mirror. If that's how you see it. Short, cold, surgical. Instead of casting yourself as the defendant, you cast them as the insecure judge. They expected resistance. They received disdain. They expected conflict. They received emptiness. They expected you to diminish yourself, but now they are the ones feeling small because they realize that the accusation itself denounces them more than it denounces you. This is turning the blade, not blocking the blow, but letting it pierce through and return poison to the hand that launched it. You've seen this in action. In debates, the one who doesn't defend themselves but retorts with sharp words never comes out the worse for wear. Someone shouts, "You're manipulative." The weak one says, "No, I'm not." The strong one smiles and replies, "Strange how only those who can't be influenced say that." There you go. The accusation died. Who seemed desperate? Who seemed fragile? It wasn't you. The accuser is now carrying the weight of their own accusation. The turn of the blade is brutal because it transforms their strength into weakness. It's like the judo of power. You don't resist, you simply use the other person's energy to bring them down. This requires coolness, control, and presence. The emotional world doesn't understand this, but the world of power bows to it, because whoever masters inversion masters perception. And whoever masters perception never loses. Machiavelli would call this the turning point, because when you turn the blade, the accuser goes from predator to prey without realizing it. He wanted to make you justify yourself, but now he's the one justifying himself. He wanted to expose you, but now he's the one sounding desperate. He wanted to steal your aura, but now he's the one naked before the crowd. This is where you understand that the accusation was never a problem. The problem was your reaction. The common man reacts and surrenders. The Machiavellian man turns every blow into fuel for his aura. It doesn't matter what anyone says, arrogant, cold, insensitive, dangerous. Every word can be used as a mask that makes him even more enigmatic. And enigma is more feared than transparency. The turning of the blade doesn't just destroy the attack, it builds a reputation. And that reputation is that of someone who cannot be touched. And when you cannot be touched, you become untouchable. There comes a point where silence is no longer just a weapon, it's armor. You no longer need to defend yourself, no longer need to invert, because your very presence becomes a magnetic field that distorts the perception of everyone around you. This is the aura of the untouchable. Machiavelli knew that the most feared men are not those who shout, not those who react, but those who remain motionless in the face of chaos. When everyone expects a collapse and you remain calm, you become something different, almost supernatural. The enemy wonders, why doesn't he react? Does he know something I don't? This doubt is the poison. This doubt is the weight. Your aura grows precisely because you don't stoop to the level of explanation. Those who try to explain themselves seem all too human. Those who don't need to explain themselves seem more than human. It seems inevitable. It seems destiny. Remember who left the biggest impression on you. It wasn't those who talked non-stop, trying to justify every move. It was those who stared and without saying a word made you feel small. An aura doesn't need proof. It needs presence. When you walk into a room and don't feel the need to please, defend yourself, or laugh at other people's jokes, the room bends before you without realizing it. That's when reputation is born. It's not about being loved. It's not about being accepted. It's about being impossible to ignore. The aura of the untouchable is built on the repetition of cold choices, not reacting, not justifying yourself, not seeking validation. Every time you resist the temptation to explain, you reinforce the invisible bricks of this fortress. And one day, this fortress is so solid that no one dares attack it because everyone already believes the attack will die before reaching its target. The aura is the stage where the game stops being about words and becomes about perception. You no longer need to cut with the blade because everyone feels the cut just by standing before you. This is why Machiavelli said that a strong reputation is more important than a good one. A good reputation depends on love, applause, acceptance. A strong reputation depends on fear, respect, and mystery. The beloved man can be betrayed at any moment. The feared man is rarely tested. And the man who builds an aura of untouchability is seen as dangerous even without raising his voice. This is the ultimate power, not convincing, not begging, not explaining, simply existing so solidly that the accusation itself evaporates before it can be hurled. But there is an even crueler paradox to be revealed. You don't have to be good. You have to be strong. And it is this reputation, strong, not good, that will define the next act of your ascension. The most common mistake men make is seeking a good reputation. They want to be seen as correct, fair, and kind. But a good reputation is a leash. It binds you to the public's expectations. You become a slave to the image you've created, always worried about not disappointing, about not tarnishing your name. Machiavelli would spit on this kind of naivete. He knew that it's not a good reputation that protects, but a strong reputation. A good reputation can be destroyed by a single convincing accusation. A strong reputation survives any accusation because it doesn't depend on purity. It depends on weight. The man who is loved needs to continue pleasing. The man who is feared needs nothing. The man with an aura of strength doesn't need to defend himself because others already believe that any blow against him would be social suicide. And therein lies true freedom, not in kindness, but in strength. Think about the great names in history. How many were loved, and how many survived because they were feared? Human memory doesn't preserve those who sought approval, but those who created fear and respect at the same time. You may even hate them, but you can't ignore them. This is the difference between a good reputation and a strong reputation. The former depends on applause. The latter creates silence, an uncomfortable silence, a silence that says, "Don't mess with him." A good reputation can be disproved in seconds by gossip, lies, and accusations. A strong reputation needs no defense because the public already assumes the attack is futile. And even when the accusation sounds plausible, it dies before it's even born because no one dares to fully believe it. The strong don't justify themselves, not because they can't, but because they don't need to. The silence of their presence is already their defense. This is the paradox most will never accept. Being seen as good is a trap. Being seen as strong is a shield. The good man is predictable, can be manipulated, can be exploited. The strong man is enigmatic, impossible to control. When you stop chasing a good reputation, you free yourself from the invisible leash that binds you to the gaze of others. You begin to build something more solid, an image that depends not on approval, but on fear. Fear doesn't have to be hate. It doesn't have to be anger. Fear is simply the certainty that you cannot be easily moved. And this certainty is more valuable than any applause. Machiavelli knew that goodness is fragile, but strength is eternal. And when you abandon the desire to be good to embrace the need to be strong, you begin the path to immunity. That point where no accusation even deserves a response. There comes a stage where you don't just master silence or inversion. You become immune. Machiavellian immunity isn't about being strong, it's about being unreachable. No matter what anyone says, no matter what they try to prove, no matter the accusations that multiply, none of them stick. Why? Because you don't react. And those who don't react are impossible to capture. The weak still feel the need to prove their innocence, to clear their name, to demonstrate purity. The immune doesn't need that. They don't lower themselves to the court of public opinion. They look down from above, as if every attack were just a distant noise. That's why few reach this level. Most are still slaves to the need to be understood. But when you kill that need within yourself, you become unreachable. Because there is no weapon more powerless than an accusation that finds no response. There comes a point in the power game where defense, inversion, and even silence are no longer enough to describe what's happening. That point is immunity. Machiavellian immunity isn't brute force. It's not blind courage. It's not superficial coldness. It's something higher, rarer, almost unattainable. Immunity is when no accusation can touch you, because you've become unreachable by the very mechanism of reaction. The weak still move. They rush to deny, to prove, to convince. The strong resist in silence. But the immune simply don't recognize the blow. The accusation arrives, but it's as if it were thrown against an invisible wall. It leaves no mark. It elicits no response. It changes nothing. This is what destroys the aggressor, because he realizes you didn't even consider it worthy to waste energy on it. Immunity is the absolute absence of need, and those who need nothing are impossible to defeat. Imagine an enemy obsessed with destroying your image. He talks, he accuses, he tries to drag your name through the mud. If you react even with controlled silence, you show that you are aware of the attack. But if you have achieved immunity, the attack simply doesn't exist for you. You don't look, you don't respond, you don't bow, you don't even try to weaponize the accusation. You ignore it until it dies alone, suffocating from lack of air. And what happens to the accuser? He starts to go crazy, because the only thing he wanted was a spark of your attention. He can't bear the emptiness of your indifference. He repeats the accusation, escalates the tone, appeals in every direction. And the more he does this, the more desperate he seems. That's when the public turns against him. Not because you out-argued him, but because your immunity effortlessly exposed his fragility. This is the brutality of immunity. You don't need to win because the other person defeats themselves. Machiavelli knew there's a difference between strength and immunity. Strength still reacts. Immunity doesn't recognize the blow. Strength can resist, can fight, can endure. Immunity transcends. It simply isn't on the same battlefield. It's like trying to attack a ghost. The more the enemy struggles, the more ridiculous it seems. And you remain above, immobile, unreachable, carrying an aura of power that no one dares test. Immunity is the final stage of a strong reputation, a point at which others already assume you're too dangerous to attack. They no longer even try. This is true dominance, when you don't need to raise your voice, when you don't need to explain yourself, when you've already won before you're even attacked. But there's a stage where this immunity becomes even more evident, where the spectacle of accusation and indifference is magnified before everyone, the Colosseum of public opinion. Silence and immunity are already devastating weapons in private settings. But when the battle takes place in front of a crowd, the game becomes a spectacle. This is the Colosseum of public opinion, the stage where reputations are built and destroyed in a matter of seconds. Here, every word is a dagger, every gesture a judgment, and every reaction is scrutinized as if it were a verdict. The common man enters this vulnerable space, ready to explain himself, thirsting for acceptance, obsessed with appearing righteous. He fails to realize that the crowd never seeks justice, it seeks blood. And the first defense you make is the first cut that opens your flesh before the audience. The public doesn't care if you're right. They want to see who's in charge. That's why Machiavelli knew, in this Colosseum, it's not the one who speaks best who wins, but the one who knows how to keep quiet at the right moment. Think of social media, televised debates and meetings filled with silent spectators. The accuser launches a barb, and all eyes turn to you. This is the most dangerous and powerful moment at once. If you rush to defend yourself, the crowd already marks you as guilty. Your rush to justify yourself proves the blow has landed. But if you maintain silence, if you don't give the accuser the satisfaction of seeing your body tremble, the tables are turned. The audience begins to ask, why didn't he respond? Is he above this? Is the accusation worthless? This vacuum makes the accuser seem smaller, emotional, unstable. They repeat, insist, force, and the more they speak, the more they destroy themselves in front of everyone. What began as an accusation against you becomes a public trial against them. Silence in this scenario is not just a weapon, it is a spectacle. And when you decide to speak, it's not to defend yourself, it's to execute precision cuts. They're short, sharp sentences that sound more like sentences than answers. Someone says, "You're arrogant." You watch, wait and say, "Strange how confidence is so frightening." Another says, "You're manipulative." You smile, tilt your head slightly and say, "Only those who can't be influenced say that." These sentences don't explain, they don't justify, they don't open up space for debate. They close, they plunge the blade into the enemy's heart in front of everyone. The audience doesn't see defense, they see dominance. They don't see innocence, they see control. In the Colosseum of public opinion, every reaction is amplified, every weakness becomes a spectacle. But when you master silence and surgical cuts, you don't just survive, you turn the audience into an ally. They stop seeing you as the accused and start seeing you as the judge. And the judge in the Colosseum never loses. After surviving the Colosseum of public opinion, the next step is the invisible construction of your inner fortress. Not a fortress of stone, but of aura, silence, and control. The common man defends himself, explains himself, chases acceptance as if every glance were an arrow that could pierce him. But the Machiavellian man builds internal walls that render any attack futile. This fortress is not visible from the outside, but felt. Every time you resist the temptation to justify yourself, every time you remain silent in the face of accusation, every time you refuse validation, a brick is added to this invisible structure. Until one day you realize nothing shakes you anymore. Insults arrive, but they don't get past the gate. Criticism tries to penetrate, but is lost in the moat. The enemy screams, but its voice dies before reaching the center. This is the inner fortress, the certainty that no external judgment is greater than internal control. Look at those who seem unshakable. They weren't born that way. They built themselves up silently, layer by layer, until they became unreachable. That's why, when accused, they don't need to answer. Their fortitude already protects them. While the weak struggle with explanations, they remain immobile, knowing that accusations can't penetrate the walls they've built. This fortitude isn't built on arrogance, but on discipline. It's the discipline of not reacting. It's the discipline of not begging. It's the discipline of never letting the enemy dictate the game. And the more you practice this discipline, the more people notice. They sense there's something in you that can't be broken. And that's what inspires respect, fear, and reverence. Because in the world of power, the most likable nor the most beloved wins. The one who can never be shaken wins. The inner fortress is also the field where enemies destroy themselves. Because when they attack someone who doesn't defend themselves, the attack returns like an echo. The audience notices the disproportion. They seem desperate while you remain cold. They seem emotional while you seem superior. They bleed trying to hurt you while you don't move a muscle. And that's where the collapse happens. Not because you reacted, but because you didn't need to react. Machiavelli knew that true power lies not in the shield, but in the fortress. The shield still depends on reaction. The fortress depends on nothing. That's why the man who builds this internal structure becomes dangerous. He cannot be manipulated, cannot be moved, cannot be controlled. And when you reach this stage, the crowd doesn't just respect you, they begin to defend you instinctively. And this instinct reveals the final step of the journey, transforming stillness into definition. Defense is weakness, silence is a sword, aura is strength. But there is a stage above all, when your very stillness becomes definition. Here, you don't just remain silent. You define your image by the absence of reaction. You are no longer the accused, nor the defender, nor the judge. You are the verdict. Your simple stillness ends the discussion before it even begins. Machiavelli would say this is the point at which you are no longer playing the game, because the game bows before you. The crowd no longer waits for words, it waits for your presence. Your stillness is so dense, so calculated, that each projects their own fears onto it. Some see arrogance, others see strength, others see mystery, but everyone sees something they cannot touch. This is the pinnacle of power, when you no longer need short sentences, nor surgical cuts, nor clever retorts. Your simple refusal to react is the sentence that dominates. This is the moment you realize you no longer need to chase anything, because stillness is enough to attract or repel, to elevate or crush. When you walk into a room and don't rush to please, when you hear an accusation and don't move, when everyone expects a reaction and receives only silence, you create a myth around yourself. The myth of the untouchable. And this myth is more powerful than any reputation built by words. A good reputation can be tarnished, a strong reputation can be challenged, but the myth is unattainable. Because the myth lives in the minds of others, not in your mouth. Stillness gives space for everyone to fill in the blank with the worst-case scenario, and the human mind always exaggerates. They assume you are colder, more dangerous, more calculating than you really are, and that presumption is true power. When you transform your stillness into definition, the social dynamic reverses. Before, others accused you and you reacted. Now they accuse you and fall silent in the face of your calm. Before, you chased validation. Now validation chases you. Before, you needed to prove your innocence. Now others rush to your defense even without your asking. This is the ultimate power, when your presence alone mobilizes the crowd. When you no longer need to defend yourself because the world does it for you. Machiavelli knew that the most dangerous man is not the one who fights to the end, but the one who never needs to fight. Because that man has already won before the battle begins. Stillness as definition is the point at which you are no longer being judged. You have become the judgment. And when you reach this stage, every accusation dies in the silence you have planted. But this is not the end. It is merely the seal of a process few endure. The process of becoming unshakable before the tribunal of the world. And now tell me, how many times have you bled trying to explain yourself? How many times have you knelt before an accusation that didn't deserve an answer? Did you notice how each defense was its own sentence? What if the only way to win was to never react again? What if true power were to be forever misunderstood? Do you have the courage to carry the weight of silence? Or do you still need to beg to be seen as good? If this tore you up inside, sign up now, because that was just the first cut.